Hello,
Hello.
welcome to Kritya Talk. Hello, Ashraf. Hello, welcome to Kritya Talk.
Yeah, hello.
We are in Kritya Talk with a very interesting topic, the poetry and politics. And two people, two very eminent scholars, poets, and who who are very close to poetry as well as the management and uh, journalism are with us, Bas Wakman and Ashraf Aboul Yazid. We are very happy to receive them because they have very good ideas about this subject. Because Bas told me that he has written some novel long back, not long back, he has written some novel where he has discuss about poetry and
Yeah,
politics.
yeah,
And politics can be any kind of politics. And same time, Ashraf is because he is a very active journalist, though he is a good poet and active journalist. So he is the very eminent personality to discuss about it. So I welcome you both, Bas and
yes.
Ashraf, to this board, and we hope that we can talk on all the direction of poetry and politics. That what is the base of politics in poetry, or how the poetry is important in modern time of politics, which is almost in all over the world, is going in a different direction or anti-humanity. And in this pandemic time, what is the use of poetry? And third thing is very small thing, but it is also important, the politics between the poetry. So I welcome you both on the board, and I go to background to listen to you. Whenever you need me, I will come. I will show in a film which Ashraf has made. Do I show now, or do I wait for 5-10 minutes, Ashraf? Your film.
No,
Your,
it's good to get the audience get that film first, and we'll start talking directly. Short
uh,
one,
okay, short
so
one.
we
Okay.
can show the film.
Oh, okay. So we will show the this film which Ashraf has made as a background of the political poetry.
A me mi piaceva pure quando hai detto sono stanca di essere uomo, perché è una cosa che pure a me, no? mi succede, però non lo sapevo dire. E quando l'ho letto mi è piaciuto molto.
Ma vedi, Mario, io non so dire quello che hai letto con parole diverse da quelle che ho usato. Quando la spieghi, la poesia diventa banale. Meglio di ogni spiegazione è l'esperienza diretta delle emozioni che può svelare la poesia a un animo predisposto a comprenderla.
In this shared vocation, the poet and politician found common cause and mutual admiration for the other's art. It brought President John F. Kennedy right here a half-century ago to the newly minted Robert Frost Library, where he said, as you all I'm sure have heard today, quote, "When power leads man towards arrogance, poetry reminds him of his limitations. When power narrows the areas of man's concern, poetry reminds him of the richness and the diversity of his existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses. For art establishes the basic truths, basic human truths, which must serve as a touchstone for our judgment. Over 50 years later, those words hit home for those of us gathered here today, undoubtedly worried that our deeply fractured country has lost that touchstone for judgment.
From childhood, I made a promise that when I grow up, I'm going to be a freedom fighter. So my red band is a symbol of my pledge, my commitment to work for the independence of Tibet. And until Tibet is not free, I'm going to wear it every day and work for Tibet every single day.
So I will go at the background and you please talk about it, and whenever you need me, I will come.
Okay.
Yeah, and thank you for introducing us. And I know I may go directly to ask our guest, Sarbas. This is regarding the tradition in the world that people, your people, any nation, are expecting something from their poet. For example, if you are in northern Ireland, they expected Seamus Henney to talk about their crisis at the moment, and Mahmoud Darwish to talk about Palestine, and also the poet we saw a minute ago to talk about Tibet, Mr. Tenzing. So, is there a rule to a poet to talk about this crisis if he is not doing his role in life?
No, I don't think that is true, because the moment that you apply rules on poets, I think it will go wrong. And of course, the relation between poetry and politics is for ages and in all countries. But I must say that poetry in the country I live in, like Holland, but I can also seem to be in Germany and France and Belgium, for a long time, the rule was more opposite. Please keep your hands off politics, because that's not the area for a poet. And if you want to be a real good poet with work that can stand for like ages, don't write about actual subjects or things that happen today in actuality, because then your poetry will be bad. And it's even so that one famous poet in my country, he said, all political poetry is bad, but all poetry is political. And that's somehow for a long time the base here in poetry, because when you don't write about what's happening in politics and you write about totally different stuff, then you also make a political adjustment or a gesture. So that is important. But it was for a long time, because of this marginalized poetry in my country and other countries, that it was taboo to write about politics. And that changed in the few years ago. It started to change. So a young generation, and it's not only in the Netherlands where I come from, but also in Germany and France and Ireland and England, a younger generation says, if we write poetry, and this is the thing we do, we have a responsibility to the politics and to the actual things that happens around us. So you can't stay aside being a poet, which poets did for a long time in our countries. But now this new generation says, no, that isn't possible anymore. If you want to write something that really gets to people, you also have to write about the things that are happening to them, and that's politics. So there's a change in.
Yeah, I read that phrase in your page. I think they had some talk about that political poems and its bad reputation being bad, and but these modern poets who are talking about daily life. Now politics have become a part of this daily life. You know, families now everywhere. I don't exclude anyone.
No.
Everyone is talking politics at home, maybe even with his children. So if poetry is connected to life, it is connected to politics as well. If it is talking about the minute details of daily life of a family, so politics will be there.
Yeah, but of course the politics and the poetry, they meet on one platform, and that is the language. But if you look at the language of poetry and the language of politics, then there's a difference, of course. It's if you speak in a political language and you use a political language, you try to use the language as a manipulative form. You want to say as straightly as possible to people what they should do. And poetry uses language more to reveal the mechanics behind the politics. So the multi-layered, more thought of language is different from the pamphletic and propagandist language that people use when they speak in the political language. And of course, when at this moment a lot of poets use political language, use framed language, because it's all around us, and it's very interesting in the case of what happens to language, but they always try to use it in an ironical or in an investigated way to reveal what's happening in the language. While on the other hand, politics always uses as straight as possible one-dimensional propagandic or even a pamphletic language to come to the people and to say what they must do. So the platform they meet is language, but the use of language is totally different.
Yeah. So that flat language maybe made poetry so related to activists. I mean, if you have some sort of vocal speech in poetry for activism, people going to a revolutionary track or something. So this is the course they are talking about. They are talking direct flat language. But why such poets we brought their photos? Why are they almost connected to revolution and activism? Why?
The poets. There's a good example from a poet that lives in Australia. His name is John Kinsella, and he says that the best language he can use for his activism, his environmental activism, is poetry. So the multi-layer and the difficulty of the cause of environment can only be put in the real language as a poet. But the fact is, as an activist and a poet who uses the language of poetry for his activism, there are not a lot of people that he can connect to, because he uses multi-layered, sometimes hermetic, sometimes difficult poetry, because that is how the world is. It's multi-layered, and it is hard to grab to. So he uses this poetical language, but I think what the politics do is to try to free that language from depth, from multi-layered. A politician will use the language as clear and as directly as possible.
Yeah, but from the poets themselves, I think they believe that such political poems will not survive. And you know, of course, Adonis, one of his early volumes of poetry, when he reprinted, he removed some of the poems. This is also that to tell that such poems didn't survive because of politics.
Yeah, but on the other hand, and that's also a thing I talked about with Adonis, in the period in my country and in Belgium and Germany and France, the same, it was taboo to write political poetry. You don't write political poetry because that is pamphletic and you don't do that. We sometimes looked like countries like in the Balkan, for instance, and then we read that there was a poet who wrote a poem about a pan of milk that boiled over, and that was, the whole country knew what he was talking about when he talked about a pan with milk that boils over. It's about the government. So they took the guy, the poet, and they put him in prison. And when I asked this to my fellow poets in Holland, there's a guy in the balcony who got in prison because he wrote a poem about a pan of milk that boiled over. They were jealous. They were jealous because they say, if you write a poem which has such big influence, and even that people in politics are afraid of you, then there's something. That's a better situation than what we do here, making poetry for people who write and read poetry just in a small world, and that only has the topic of the language itself and never something outside the language. So there was a jealousy there, and that's also what I spoke about with Adonis. Adonis also said, from people can use my poem, and if they feel the freedom to use my poem, it's a good poem.
I see.
Yeah,
this is good. And if we refer to the era of publishing, uh, how can a volume of poetry survive the era? You know, if there was someone who advocates some regime or some
yeah,
leader, and the leader, you know, was replaced by a coup or any other accident. So how could such a poet or a poem survive that
yeah.
historical thing?
I think I have a good example for that. When I worked with the Poetry International Web, a big international digital organization that has a great archive of poetry and that works with editors worldwide, we worked with an editor who in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe is well known about their great poets and the great books and publishing houses. It was beautiful, but then the politics were that way that all the publishing houses were destroyed, no books were made. So the politician thought that they killed somehow poetry. But in a period like that, when all the publishing houses are gone, the newspapers are gone, even the journals about poetry are gone, people use poetry on stages. They use it on the street. The spoken word tradition, the slam tradition, the musicians who used poetry in the music and when they were on stage. So the poetry, it moved from the book from the journal to the stage, and now there is a vibrant community in Zimbabwe of spoken word artists that can say what they want. And spoken word artists are real more political even than the written poets. So that's poetry always survives, but it finds another way to reveal themselves.
Yeah. Do you think that this social media is helping poetry to survive by spreading them once and more? Because now many users are reprinting or republishing or resharing these old poems, political ones, especially during nowadays we are commemorating the golden jubilee of Gamal Abdel Nasser. So
Yeah.
many social media brought those poems written to about Abdel Nasser and published them. So social media is helping, I mean, to promote such political poems.
Social media, of course, helps, but there is another thing that anyone can put something on social media, and all the things they put on social media are somehow in balance, are the same. So all the great and good poetry is now available on social media, and I'm very happy with that. All the bad poetry and all the failed poetry and poetry that isn't even poetry and poetry that looks like poetry but is a political propaganda, it all comes on social media, and it asks for the people to divide that, to weigh the things they read and to think about them themselves. Is this fake or is this real or is this? And it's always the same with social media. There's a good side because it's acceptable worldwide. You can read in 1 hour a poem that a Russian guy wrote an hour ago, and in 1 hour you can read it, which is great. But the filter, the thing that people look for you what good poetry, what they think is good poetry, and they present it to the world, the filter is gone. So you sometimes you have to hack your way into 800 poets to find one good poem. So there's a danger always on that side.
Yeah, I read one of the comments said political poetry will not exist. It is a propaganda from imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
How do you comment from Soman Pinkos?
Political poetry will not exist isn't propaganda from imperialism. Of course, it's. I just said that the people in Europe also now are very keen on the subject of writing political poetry because it's part of their world. But one thing they don't do, which in politics do, and that is the one-sided, like a pamphletic or propagandist goal. So they, like you just showed in your film, Pablo Neruda, of course, in the famous film of the Postman, which was great.
El
But
Postino,
also,
yeah.
yeah, but also Pablo Neruda wrote an ode to Stalin, which, in my opinion, is not his best work, and it's an example of this one-sided pamphletic poetry, which I don't like because it's not multi-layered. It's not something I'm thinking of, and I'm thinking of for a whole week. No, it's just you have to embrace Stalin, which is
Yeah,
one-sided.
you
Yeah,
jumped that to that question, Bas. I
yeah,
was asking about such relationships between poets and political leaders. I was asking how who will control it or who will judge it? Will it be the historian or the literary critic? I mean, such
yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, for me, the literary critic, but in, for like more than 100 years or more than 200 years, I think after the Enlightenment, there was a shifting between politics and art. So in Europe, most of European country, and interesting that you mentioned Ireland, because Ireland is also the relation between politics and poetry is very narrow there. But in the other countries, it was divided. Politics don't interfere with art, and artists don't interfere with politics. And that's our DNA. That is what 200 years we were brought up with. It was in our educational system, it was in our books, it was our. And now, slowly, for a small period, it changes a bit. And it's not that the politics will use poetry, because from their side on, from the political side, they don't use or try to make the poets say what they want. The politics still think about art, not interesting. They just do whatever they want. On the other hand, the poets and the artists, they now are fully aware of the positions they have in the society and say we have to use that position also for political goals, for environmental goals, for you name it, against fake news, against the politics, the extremely right-wing politics that is now in Europe. Poets have to go against that. But from the politics side, there's no relationship. But the relationship now begins with the poets and the art itself.
And is there some sort of, let us say, relationship between poets themselves regarding one school, one leader, or one regime? I mean, this fight between poets themselves regarding some issue, that small wars between icons of poetry regarding the same issue. And this is again reminds me of with two names in Syrian situation now, very clear politics. It's about Adonis and Nouri al-Jarrah, for example.
Yeah.
They are poets and they are from Syria and they are on the opposite sides and they are telling, they are giving the truth, and they are, of course, I believe that they are both are good poets and
Yeah.
they have their names in the literary
Yeah.
scene.
Yeah, what I talk about that the poets in Netherlands, France, and Germany are somehow even jealous on poets that really can say something and endanger themselves. We made a documentary movie about Adonis a few years ago, and it's a beautiful film. And it was also about his place in Beirut where he lived, but he couldn't go there because it was forbidden for him to go there. And I was somehow shocked with what Adonis told about his stand in politics. And of course, his poetry is full of symbolism, is full of metaphors. It's rich. It's double. Adonis doesn't say, "This is my political opinion, and people who read this must do that, must do this." He doesn't. People know about his political point of
views
in the discussions they have with him in the interviews, but the role of this politics in his poetry, it's there. It's definitely there, but it's written as poetry, so it's multi-layered. It's go one the other way. It uses metaphors. It uses images for something he said. So it still is poetry.
Yeah.
But for the instance, for the other hand, in America, I have till now not met a poet who was pro-Trump. I haven't seen a poet doing that. I'm very curious about that. Would there be a good poet who writes interesting poetry about pro-Trump? And I know a lot of poets who are against Trump because that's what their opinion. So I don't see a lot of politics or sides of politics that use poetry to go against each other. There's always the absolute freedom, the individual freedom of a poet to write whatever he or she wants.
Yeah, of course. Poetry is poetry, but the two characters are opposite in their opinions about the situation.
Yeah.
And we have here another two poets.
And for me, the interesting question is, does that lead to good poetry? And good poetry, there's a very tough discussion. What is good poetry? Because you cannot tell about poetry of everything, but good poetry, that we can change of opinion, of course, with that. But if you say there's a left wing, right wing of opposite poets to one another, I really don't care if when it leads to extremely good poetry, because it's hard to connect, because that is very subjective, to connect the thought of good poetry to a political movement. That is strange. If you can say, I don't like right-winged poetry because I'm not right-winged, that is strange, because right-winged poetry can be good poetry if you just see it as poetry. But that is hard because there's always this connection.
Yeah, regarding that, there were before Nelson Mandela some poets in South Africa who fought for their freedom against the apartheid and so on. So after this era, how can you evaluate such poems written in that era? Because they were controlled by the situation there. And we will refer, of course, that it should be a good poetry first. So we will come back to all political poems are not good.
No, that's what the guy said. All political poetry is bad, but all good poetry is political. So that's exactly the ambivalence there. When Mandela was freed and he had his first speech, he used a poem from the poet Ingrid Jonker.
Yeah.
And it's a white poet living in South Africa. And he used that poetry about the killing of the massacre of people in the township. That's what the poem was about. And that poem, the fact that he chose that poem, that had such tremendous impact on the world of poetry as a total, not only in South Africa, but still in Holland, in Germany, in Russia, in America. They know that Mandela uses that particular poem, and the poem become very popular. And it was not that somebody wrote a poem for him to use in speech. The poem was already there, and it was strong, very strong, and he used it, and the fact that he used it made it even stronger. Of course, in that period,
the choice is poetic.
Yes,
his choice was poetic. Yeah.
Yes, not political, poetic, and it becomes political, of course. Yeah.
And we will shift to two more poets. Our host, Rat Saxena, who wrote a wonderful poem about one famous activist poet in India, Varvara Rao. And she has it in Hindi.
Yeah.
Of course, I believe many viewers would like to listen to such poem. And also I translated into Arabic, so I will read few lines after she finishes the Hindi version.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah, I will read first, but it was very interesting topic that some says that poetry, political poetry is not a good poetry, and some say that poetry is always politics, or politics only make you write poetry. Politics does not mean the politics of nation or universe or left or right. That can be anyone. In a that because I am a student of Sanskrit, and according to Sanskrit, the language, the meaning of politics is Rajaniti. Rajaniti means the duty of a king, or the duty of a kingdom, which should be taken in care of human. So, if anything against humanity is a political. So, anything written about a political, about these things, can be political. Unfortunately, at that era, that time in Sanskrit time, uh, we did not get very strong political poetry, or we have a poetry have a vast meaning. Even the theater was also like what we say that epics, Sanskrit epics, which was a form of drama. What you call this like Shakespeare? That kind of drama was there in a Kalidas Bhasa, and in a long before the Shakespeare's era. In that era, only one book is there about the politics of that time, that is called Richkatikam, means a a a, a cart of mud. And this era, or this book only talk about the politics of that complete almost 100 200 years literature. And it was very strange that uh, purposely or not purposely, that writer was never counted in the history. But now he is the most important after many years, for thousand years. He is most important now because it shows the political situation. Because we were just reading that Kalidas and Bhasa and all, we were liking that, yeah, such a beautiful nature, beautiful language, beautiful people, everything beautiful, which is impossible. But when you read this Brichikatikam, you find out that how people were fighting against the kingdom and how they were doing for the society. So, and there was another politics in literature which has hidden that thing, that political poetics from our line. But it became very popular for the scholars, for historians to understand that area. Another thing, for I feel that when you start poetry, for me, example, you start with your own. You're talking to your own. It is very organic to write a poetry if you have some you can write something, and you're talking to your own. But slowly you are bringing out your own politics, like your family politics, your social politics, for especially for a woman. You don't I do not know whether you add in a politics, but I can add, because how the women is treated in a family, how a woman is treated in a society, how a woman is treated in a working place. So for me, that is also politics. And these all political things which are not related to the king or political or high class politics also become a political poetry, and which is very organic for any woman writer. 99% they start from themselves, their suffering, their mismanagement from the society for them, and or whatever thing is there. So what I feel that politics come naturally, organically in poetry, but there are many who write purposely politically. For example, yesterday there was a rape case in India, and today I got message in my message box that read this poem. I was still shocked. I was still crying inside my soul. I was still not able to touch any word, and the poetry was already ready.
Yeah.
And then the question came that I said that I don't read the hot cakes from the baking house. Then the answer came out that it is a good poetry. I said, if on a bad subject, on the subject of a rape or killing, if you write a good poetry, I don't consider it as a good poetry.
Mm-hmm.
It may come afterward as a anger, anything. Now I will talk, I will, because I have recorded this Varvara Rao poem in Hindi, I will run that my video, and I will give you an example. The Varvara Rao, I was writing the whole word about Varvara Rao. He is a poet, one thing, but same thing, he is an activist also. He is working for his side. If we feel that he is working for the deprived people who are called the Adivasi, means that the people who lived in a actually who were the rooted people, what we say that Native American kind of Native Indian people, but who are deprived from all kind of uh, um, uh, freedom or all kind of uh, any kind of profit or benefit. So he was working for them also. So his poetry was also, he was not writing political poetry only. He was writing very natural poetry also. Same time, he was a voice of those people, deprived people. And when he is 82, he is jailed. And for almost 8 years, he cannot run. They have not put him jail. No one has put him jail for many years. And now he is he is in jail at the age of 82 and he got the COVID. And I wrote this letter to most of the poets in the world, but very few good remark. I got it back. So I feel that what happened to poets? They are not understanding. They are not giving a voice for a poet. He is originally poetry. So this poem I have written, which is very old poem of Varvara Rao. One line I have taken. He has said that the poet is like a stream. A poet is like a stream. So see, a stream is always fresh water coming. And that poem comes, and I have taken this word only. And I'm asking that when poet is only a stream, then why you are afraid of that stream?
Then
Poet is not a river.
I couldn't understand the last one. When a poet is a stream, why? What the question?
No, I put the question, when poet is like a stream, then why are you afraid? Why you see, he's talking about the poet is like a stream. He's not a lion.
No.
He's not killing you.
Right.
He's just bringing a music to you, the voice from the hidden jungles.
Yeah.
The stream is bringing the voices, the smells, the aromas, all those good things from the hidden places, jungles to the people.
Yeah.
So he's like a stream, and when he's like a stream, so why be afraid of him? So this is my poetry, and it is Hindi. In Hindi, I will give you the English translation after. I hope you will like it. Okay. Oh, it's not coming. 1 minute.
एक कविता कवि वरवर राव के लिए। कवि झरना होता है, मैंने कहा था ना, कवि सिंह नहीं सिर्फ झरना होता है। फिर क्यों तुम मुझसे थर्रा उठे? झरना कोई बांध नहीं तोड़ता, झरना शहरों को भी नहीं डुबोता। झरना जंगलों की गाथा लेकर आता है शहरों के पास और याद दिलाता है वे ध्वनियां जिन्हें उनके कान सुनना भी भूल गए थे, वे रागिनियां जिन्हें सुनना दुश्वार हो चुका था। रोशनियों में बुनी अंधेरी परछाइयां, जमीन के हकदार जीवों की कहानियां। मैंने कहा ना, कवि सिंह नहीं होता कि जंगल वासियों के हिस्से का पानी पी जाए और भोक्ता बन जाए अपनी ही प्रजा का। कवि सिर्फ झरना होता है, मैंने पहले भी कहा था। झरना एक आवाज देता है और जंगल आ चुकता है, शहर भी दौड़ा चला आता है। झरना सिर्फ जान देता है नदी में विलय होकर, जिसमें तुम अपना मैला झोंक देते हो। कवि सिर्फ झरना ही था, फिर शासन क्यों डर गया? नदी क्यों चुप आ गई? जेल की सलाखें झरने को बांध नहीं सकती। गीला ठंडा फर्श कवि की देह को नहीं बल्कि उसकी आवाज को आजाद करता है। कवि सिर्फ झरना होता है। मेरी आवाज पहुंचेगी धरती के गर्भ में, बीज बन फिर उगेगी पौधा बन। तुम कितनी भी सलाखों में बांध दो, मेरी आवाज फैलेगी दिक दिगांतर।
So now I go at the back, and questions are also there. Very interesting questions also there. You can read. So.
Thank you. I was thinking about.
We need it in English. We need it.
Yeah. I was thinking about what Rati said about a poet is a stream and how can a stream be dangerous. I was thinking about a poet from Jamaica. His name is Kwame Dawes, and he told me, for instance, when in Houston there was a flooding a couple of years ago, there was a big storm, and the city of Houston totally got flooded. It was a disaster. And all journalists from all world, from not only America but from all the world, they went to Houston to write about the flood and the disaster there. But the people in Houston thought, okay, for this moment we are a big topic in the news. Everybody comes here to write about a flood, but they write it in newspapers. So the next day the newspaper will be thrown away and people forget this. We don't need journalists, we need poets. We want to invite poets to Houston to write about what they see, to write about what is happening as a sort of journalist poetry. Because if a good poem is read in 5, in 10, in 20 years, people still read that poem. So the disaster that happened in Houston will be on the mind of people in 20, 30 years when it's somehow managed to get into a poem instead of in a newspaper. And I think a stream, if you say a poet is only a stream of water bringing fresh, a stream can be very dangerous for politicians if the stream takes everything with him. So if a lot of people will dive in the stream to go with the stream, like Pablo Neruda in Chile did, he uses his poetry, the poems, the verses of the Machu Picchu, to rise up his people, and that became a political thing that was very important in the country and very dangerous for the people that were the politicians at that moment. So the stream can be dangerous, a poet can be dangerous, but the difference is still, I'm thinking, is the language. And in politics, people use the language to manipulate people. And what poets do is reveal the language, what's happening behind the language, what's really said. And that's an interesting point of view. I give you an example. A good poet who lives in South Africa now, he took a brochure from the government about the danger of terrorism. He put brochure and he wrote it down in verses, and he presented it as his own poem. And because people read it as a poem, the content of that brochure totally changed. Maybe you can compare it with if a truck rides in front of a fabric, a big magazine, then it makes a different sound than when a truck goes by a conservatory, because the people in that conservatory, they have another approach to sound, so the truck will have another sound there than when it's just coming out of the fabric. And that's the same with poetry. If the poet uses the language of the politicians in a poetical environment to reveal what's happening there in language, it comes multi-layered and bigger, and then it even can be dangerous for politics. You understand?
Yes, of course, I agree with you, because this form change has shaped generations in Egypt. When the sayings of Nasser, for example, it came to the songs, many singers and musicians and poets as well transferred the words about communism, about High Dam, about the revolution into poems to be sung everywhere. So this situation shaped the generation to advocate the revolution and its people. I know the form changes that situation.
Yeah. And the topic of the movie just Rati showed. Can you tell me what was it about? Because it wasn't English. What was the key topic of?
That is the full poem she wrote to Varvara Rao, and she started with the line. She gave an example that, "Why are you afraid of him?" And I will request her to say it in English, because this will give me that to say in Arabic.
Actually, I have to take out that poem. This poem, I have taken first line from the Varvara Rao poem, where he says that poet is like a stream. And I have written that the poet is like a stream. And a stream comes from the jungle with the memories of jungle, with the aroma of the jungle, with good or bad thing from the jungle to the city people, to the world. So in that, so then why you are afraid? You means the people who want to put him in under behind the bar. He is not a lion. He will not kill you. He is only this fountain or a stream. The stream never overflow the cities. Stream never destroy the villages. Stream never destroy the houses. Stream come in one place and then give a pleasant and a beautiful place where people come and enjoy the aroma of jungle. So why I said this? Because he is talking from the native Indians. So that is the jungle where you're not entering. He's entering. He's bringing their memories, their good things, their bad things. So he's only bringing their voice to you.
But to take up the metaphor, if you say poetry is like this stream that seems to be harmless, but if politics thinks that the stream can be harmful, they build a dam. So all the water will go into the dam, all the poetry, and when a lot of poetry comes to the dam breaks, and then it's not harmless, then the whole city will flood. So there's this metaphor of, okay, you can see that poetry can be harmless, but a lot of poets, a lot of stream, and then try to dam it down, and it's impossible. And when it breaks, and that is what happened in Houston, then you get a total flood. This is the same thing I mentioned in the beginning about this.
They are literary critic to explain it like this. It needed so many because they want no voices. That's why they brought him behind bars.
That's why I was talking about this can of milk that was boiling over. When I read that poem, I thought it's about a can of milk that boils over. But when I read that the writer, that the poet who wrote that, has spent 8 years in prison because of he wrote that, then I could understand. Okay, this is a metaphor for a political gesture, which can really be dangerous.
We were talking mostly about men, revolutionary icons, poets, and so on. But also women have their role in activism and their role in revolution and their role in writing political poems and so on. But what is famous on the scene is only the image of men in the front line. Why women? Is it a gender problem regarding the same? Because the old-fashioned image of a women that they don't fight, they don't struggle, they don't lead. Why is that?
I'm quite happy to say that that's not the case in the place where I live, and that poetry is a domain of both men and women. Political poetry is the domain of both men and women, and at the moment, the most interesting poems which really relate to society and what's happened in the moment now is from women poets in Holland, but I think also in Germany and France. Germany, I think it's the same. So that there's no division in that at this moment. I'm happy to say, because when there was a division, it would be awful.
Yeah, I could, while I was searching, I could brought many voices, not only from Europe, but from America, Asia, and even Japan. And I was asking, but maybe because of the media is lacking covering their voices regarding the same. Maybe the media has something to do with this.
And what is the situation in India now on that topic? Of women poets,
regarding
men poets.
This Rachi could answer.
Regarding in women poetry,
yeah,
that is very strange thing. As you said, that Facebook is sometimes good and bad both. So in Facebook, you are getting good and bad poetry both.
Yeah.
But good thing is that because of Facebook, many who were not able to write before are writing. That is a very good thing. And I see that very good young voices. A few years back in 2015, I had a question in Kerala about that why there are no Malayalam writers, and I didn't get. Maybe it was my shortcome that I couldn't get. But now in 2020, in 5 years, we get very good Malayalam writers in women also, who are using new uses, and because they are reading, they are approaching to word poetry, so they know that how they can improve them, how they can become more effective. But if you ask someone to select 10 poets from one area, there will be hardly one women poet will be selected. If there is a poetry reading, you will see on the stage, in Indian stage, you will find 10 men and one woman, hardly. Where you have seen Bas in Kritya, we have 4 men and 6 women internationally.
But to the balance, it's not enough. I just told you that in Holland, there at the moment are more interesting women that writes poetry than men. But it's not only the case of the balance in the poets, because the juries of prizes, if the jury is 5 people and 4 of them are men, then there could be a chance that less women were selected. If an editor, the publishing houses, the directors of publishing houses, programmers of festivals, if there's not a balance and they are ruled by men, by more men, then there's a chance that are becoming more men on stage. So it's not only to build that new balance from the poets themselves, but also in the layers that chooses or that editing poetry must be in balance. And that's I can say for Holland, because the publishing houses, the directors there are merely women in this country, a lot of women. But still, on the side of juries and people who program festivals, it's not balanced on a good way at the moment. And I think what you told me about in India, when you have a stage and there are 9 men and 1 woman, then I want to know who's programming that stage, who is creating that festival, and how he or she is looking at the material. I think
actually, they expect that a woman should always take a shoulder from a man. And Kritya was not liked by critics, by the people, because Kritya has not taken shoulder, not taken any help from any man.
Yeah.
So that is why they don't like.
Yeah.
Another thing, they don't like dominating women. Then they don't like an intellectual woman.
Yeah.
My work on the poetry therapy is never discussed in India.
Yeah.
Because that they don't expect a woman to think intellectually.
Yeah, long way to go.
And then and they expect, and sometimes I feel that sometimes it is purposely a weak poet, a weak writer is given a good push so that they will be very safe, that opposite to them a very weak person is there. So that is another thing. If you are a good writer, or if you're a good poet, or if you are intellectual, or if you are a good manager, and if you are a little bit dominating in sense means that not bullying everyone. But dominating means I don't take your decision. I am making decision, and you have to follow. And I follow. I do that.
Yeah.
I do that. Otherwise, I cannot do that. Yes, in a friendly manner. I know that how to behave and how to talk to another person. I respect all. But if you want to bully me, if you want to dominate, you have to do that. I will not accept. So they don't accept me. So not only me.
Are there in India positions with newspapers or publishing houses with leading functions by women?
No, there are very few. I don't think any women is leading publishing house. No one, because it is very difficult. Moreover, the publishing house is almost a cheating house. They give you, they say you will get 9% and all, but I never get at the end any yearly expenditure that how much we sign all this thing, but we don't get any. And people don't talk, especially for poetry. I don't think any poet is getting a single pie.
Okay.
Mostly poets, young poets, are spending money on publishing their book.
Yeah.
For people like me, I don't give money, but I never got money.
No, that's
so
strange.
If my husband is not there, his retirement money is not there, I will not survive.
Yeah.
So that is the problem.
Yeah. That's a huge
problem.
And
this brings me to a question to our topic, that a poet is not living from his poems. He is something else. I am translating, writing articles. Mr. Bass also doing the same thing. He is not only writing poetry, he is managing, and he is translating, and he is doing presenting, and so on. And you are the same. So how could you expect something from such poets who are not independent? Who are depending on someone else or some job else to do their job in politics and in life?
Yeah, I once to have a sort of anecdote. Therefore, once a poet said to me, "The best thing that ever happened to poetry is that it's freed itself from money. No one gets money from poetry. The poet doesn't get any money. The publishing house earns with prose, but not with poetry. The stages, the festivals, with poetry, there's no money involved because no one's get money, and that's somehow a freedom from that whole world of money that we need as poets." And I didn't totally agree with him, but I thought it was very interesting that he said, from all the art forms, poetry is one of the disciplines that totally have nothing to do with money, and that's a good thing for poetry because it's totally free from that. And
so poetry makes me survive to do something else to get money to pay for electricity, for example.
Yeah. Now, I think what he meant was when poetry is really get involved in the world of money, what will happen with the poetry? If which poet will get a lot of money? There will be a world, because the world of money is a world of politics. So when poetry goes into the world of money, it will become a play ball, or it becomes a short vessel in the storm. So the freedom of not interfere with the world of money make it possible to. Yeah.
Yes,
and in
but
I will ask final question, Rati. We are in a world full of wars, complications, even pandemic make it worse. And in such world seeking peace, everyone is looking that to good life, a world without wars. And poets and poetry are calling for continuous struggle for to free their country and so on. So there is opposition how to be in a world seeking peace, but you are seeking to continue fighting. This is contradicted.
Yeah, I will tell you a story which has some influence on me, has some effect on me. I once was at a festival, and then the host came and told there will be coming a poet now. She's a young girl. She comes from an African country, and when she was 12, they gave her a K-94, a weapon. They gave her drugs and weapons, and she had to shoot other young people. That was her task in a sort of guerrilla form. And she did that for a few years. And then she said, maybe they kill me, but I have to stop this life. So she threw away the gun and she started to write poetry. This was the story that the host told. And everybody in the audience, was a big audience, were totally overwhelmed by that story, that a child of 12 is getting a mitrailleur and kills people. That's terrible. And they were very happy that she stopped it, that she could stop it, and started to write poetry. Then this girl came up on the stage, starting to read her poetry, and it was really bad poetry. It was awful. It was only about trying to put roses in the guns, and it was not multi-layered. It was. I think if you only read that poetry, it would never gone on that stage. But the public was still overwhelmed by her story, that they embraced her as being a person which had this great story about her. But what comes out of it was, in my opinion, bad poetry. And then somebody asked me, I was on stage, and then somebody asked me, what do you think of this poet? And I tried to say as polite as possible that I was totally overwhelmed by her story and by her presence. And I wasn't that overwhelmed by her poetry. And it took 4 policemen to free me from the crowd that was so angry at me that I had to run away from the back to the theater. They were so angry at me because they thought I was attacking the girl. And I thought about the story. I thought a lot about it because it's so great that she found poetry and that she could swap the killing for poetry. That story is beautiful, but it's not one-to-one that story will lead to good poetry. And of course,
she's killing with words. She was killing with words, not bullets.
And of course, it's very subjective. And I think in the audience there will be people who thought it was a beautiful idea to put flowers in guns, but it's cliche. It was not good poetry, and I had to run for my life.
I wanted to share one experience what Bas was telling. That we had a great poet in Kerala, Dr. Ayyappa Panikar. Ayyappa Panikar was Malayalam English teacher, professor, and he was writing a Malayalam poetry. And he brought all the modernism in the Malayalam poetry. He is the door of modernism, and he was very, very experimental poet and very, very modern. He also said the same thing. If we started selling poetry, then we will not work for the words, or we will be not honest. Then we will be honest for the money only. We will be honest for how I'm getting benefit out of this poetry. So he said that poetry is like a worship only. So I was telling him, because you are a professor, you are getting a good money and a good and after that a good retirement, a pension. But what about the other people? Then he said, do translations, do other things
Yeah.
for the livelihood, but
Yeah.
don't expect money from the poetry. This is
Yeah.
one thing. Second thing, this kind of experience are there in India also. Very bad poetry, very misconduct poetry. Not a single word was correct, no images, and the person was getting very good support or support from the audience. Sometimes I feel because it could reach to audience very easily, because
Yeah.
now I feel very difficult, because we have many ways to write poetry, that abhida abhyajana, etc, many we have alankaras means the different way of
Yeah.
presenting yourself.
Yeah.
This is Sanskrit poetics was
Yeah.
fantastic, and I studied that. So when I read the straight poetry like a slogan, and people say, "How do you like them?" I said that no, I don't like, and after that he become my enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is that whatever you're writing, even though you're writing about a political situation, then also you have to use the poetics.
Yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
use the language of poetry.
Yeah.
You
But
should understand.
that's interesting, because on the other hand, the three of us, Rati, Ashraf, and me, we are a bit spoiled because we read a lot of poetry, and I can say from a young age, I read poetry and I worked in poetry for a long time. I cannot expect from the audience that they had the same background. So I'm also aware of who I am, and I'm also aware how I was brought up. I was educated in the 80s. The 80s was the l'art pour l'art period, so the art is only for the arts. Poetry is only interesting for poetry. I was educated in that period, so in my DNA is that thought also. So I'm quite aware that I'm privileged. I'm white. I'm living in a rich country. I read a lot of poetry. I could study it. I could study art, and that made me to someone who says in the worldwide what he thinks of is good poetry or bad poetry, and that's very subjective. And it came, of course, because how I was educated, where I live, how I look, it's all influencing my point of view about poetry. So it's a hard discussion what is good poetry. If a poet that is bad in my opinion because of who I am, where I came from, and someone says because of that poem I changed my life and I'm doing different things now, then the effect of the poem was good. I still can say I don't like the lines and the verses, but the effect is good. So it's very subjective, and it's a difficult question because it all comes also the discussion about political and the relation between politics and poetry. It's subjective. People who say I have a political opinion and I read a poet, and he says exactly the same as I said, so this is a good poem. You can argue with that, but it's a subjective argument for part. What do you think of that? What is your opinion of that? The point where you stand when you talk about poetry.
Ashraf.
Bas, Bas, it's a matter of this plant, this seed, this little seed you was taking care of from the very early beginning. It is not coming suddenly.
No.
You are not born, like they say, you are not born a poet. No, you are that little seed that grows, and with the right water, the right timing of growing, the right rays of sun, everything was perfect enough to be such a flower or such poem or such man of critic and man of words. It is not a matter of sudden thing that comes like inspiration and devils are giving you words from above. No. It is growing with the DNA. It is exactly the same. You said it. It's a DNA. It's that seed with the water inside, the backbone that goes day and day to be the one you are about to say your judgment freely and with the most belief you have and the most faith that you are correct. This is the way. Actually, our talk was about poetry, politics, and humanity. And humanity was not mentioned because this whole dialogue is humanity. Humanity is covering, is our umbrella, and it is our vision of the world that it is covering everything. We are talking from different points of view and also from different locations, geography, history, but something is driving us. I think this is the power of poetry that gives us to smile, to survive, and to write, and to accept the others' views, which is very important.
I just want to ask that. What do you think about the politics in poetry?
Politics in poetry. So
Yes.
it's more the
poets politics.
The politics between poets themselves and between festivals themselves.
No, sometimes there is a politics.
I know, and I know.
Poets.
We talked about it earlier. We know about that because when I thought that when a poet is free of the money, of the world of money and the world of politics, and can be his own poet himself, that's hard. It's a hard life because you don't get paid, which is terrible. But the other hand, it gives you a sort of freedom to be the poet you want to. But the organizations like festivals, like websites, like publishing houses, they depend a lot of money because otherwise they couldn't exist. So they are more than the poet are open for influences, for help of governments. And then you get a situation in the world of poetry that governments helping festivals or publishing houses or editors or newspapers with a political objective in that. So if, for instance, there was a Chinese minister coming to Holland, and he was the Minister of Culture. It was 10 years ago, and he asked me. The government has a lot of supports a lot of poets. There are more than 1,000 commission groups of poets, and they all lead it by commissions. And there's a lot of poets, and it's all helped by the government. And if you would invite for your festival one of these poets, I can pay the tickets, I can pay the stay, the hotels, I can pay everything. Why don't you choose one of those poets? And I said, I choose poets because I read poetry, and the poetry I like and my organizations like and my committee likes, we invite those poets. And he said, why? Because you can invite another poet and then I can pay the trip and I can pay the hotel. So that is how government can influence the programming of a festival. And I was very happy to organize a festival which was quite independent, also money-wise quite independent. So we could say, no, we don't invite a poet because you pay for it. We invite a poet that we have to pay for because we have to get him out of a small town in the south of China. But that poetry must be on the stage in Rotterdam because it's important poetry. So this is an example how governments somehow will try to influence publishing houses, festival directors, programmers, newspapers, because they hope that they will go with their objectives, that the poet will say things they like. And to be that independent is, I think, harder for organizations than for poets solely, only the poets. For the organizations, it's hard not to depend on that money because that money gives you are being a part of the political system. Is that what you mean, Rati?
You know that I know this story, and I also know my own words on also.
Yeah.
I'm from 2014. I am in connection with China 16 because I have gone first. Yan Ding, you may remember that he painter. He has organized a very small poetry festival where 3-4 people were there.
Yeah.
And that is actually starting the Chinese poetry festivals, and they were actually fantastic because you are communicating with the local people, the communicating with the young people. You are going to libraries. You are going to boats and all. Beautifully manner he was doing. I met that there very strong Chinese poets who were really strong.
Yeah.
And who's they were given a good position in university being a poet.
Yeah.
One of that Yu Jian, you know him. He came to our festival Kritya in 2017.
Yeah.
He was number 2 poet in China, and another 3-4 poets who were very strong. Now you find that their poetry is disappear from the world map. Only the given poetry from a certain source is coming to the world.
Yeah.
Because if you're getting a good amount of money for translation, you can be get translated in many languages. It happened in Kritya also. One Korean poet, their company only communicate me, and they said I did not know that people. I met him in a Medellin Poetry Festival only. And they came to here, Kritya in 2012 or I think 12.
Yeah.
And you know that 6 people came with him. One doctor, 2 assistants, and all the house, the hotel I gave, they discarded. They have gone to the best hotel.
Yeah.
And uh, uh, it was actually that time some poets were very unhappy who were real poets.
Yeah.
Were very unhappy that why this man is because he was moving with 10 people around him.
Yeah.
And that was actually what he said, that you are planning something to reach the world or to organize some award. It was like this. And it happened in Kritya, which was my mistake, but my mistake unknowingly.
Yeah.
I didn't keep any touch after them. But sometimes we also don't understand what is going to us who is coming to our festival, because every time new people are coming. So
but that could be very hard. Yeah. It could be very hard because I was in a position a few years ago that a multimillionaire from a country, he gives a big prize to poetry, which is very important and very good that he does that. And he said, this year I want to present the prize on your festival. And I thought, oh, that's great. But I will give the money for you to organize the festival. But if I give you the money and give the prize to a poet on your festival, you have to invite these 3 poets. That was his committee, or it was his jury. And I knew the 3 poets, and I even thought 1 or 2 were reasonably good. But the fact that someone said, here I have an envelope with a lot of money. If you take it, you have to invite these 3 poets. That was not possible for me, because then the money would invite poets and not a committee and not we ourselves. So with, I must say, pain in my heart, I rejected it because I needed the money badly. But I rejected it because I said, my whole festival, it lives for 50 years now, is totally depending on its independency. It's an independent festival. It's a committee of people who know a lot about poetry, and they choose every year what they think are the best poets in that year. It's part subjective, of course, but that's how we build our festival. And of course, I can get tempted when somebody waves with a lot of money in front of my eyes and say, take this money and I save your festival. But if I would do that, I would be part of this governmental, of this world of money. People who pay will pay also for their influence in the festival. And that's the end of an independent festival. But I also know that I was in a position to say no, and I could still save my festival because we had some allowance from the government that totally didn't interfere with our choices. So I could say no. I was in that position. But if there are festivals worldwide, I'm not in this position, and they would say no to a multimillionaire who gives them money. If they say no, then there will be no festival. Because I can totally understand that they say yes. But what happens to the festival next is that people buy their influence in a festival, in a newspaper, in a publishing house. and that's dangerous.
And we have never taken money from anyone.
No.
We have not taken any money, and we always in Kritya, we work for the. We cannot give tickets, but we work for the poets so that they can get a ticket. Like two young poets came from Netherlands, and I have filled the form for them, and I have written all these things, accounts and everything, that how much they are going. And I especially told them that I don't pay money to Kritya, pay directly to the poets. And some poet told me that add $100 in it. I said no. Ticket is ticket. I'm writing only ticket, and you get what they are giving. So we never taken money. That is why we could survive for. We also survived for from 2005 to 2000. Now also 17. After 17, 3 years I was quiet. So we could survive because we were not under any pressure of money, and that helps you. Because the people who are working with you are honest, because they know that because you are honest, so they will work free of cost. And all the supporters work for me free of cost. They have not taken any money from me. So honesty is very important.
There's another story about a festival I once was. 4 friends of mine who live in China, Chinese men, they were 4 poets, and every weekend they came together and they wrote poetry. But they were poor, and they were writing poetry to no money. We all just write poetry, but we don't have money, and the economics are booming in China. So what we decide, we go work, and for 7 years, and then we go back to poetry. So one started a cab business, taxi business. One started a hotel. One started a travel business, and also all kinds of things they started. But economics was so booming that every person with a bit of intellect could build a very growing company. So in 7 years, they were very rich. There was a taxi company, was huge in every city. The hotel was a chain of hotels throughout China, and the travel agent was the biggest travel agent become in China. So they became tremendously rich. And then he stopped working. He said, "Okay, we did this for 7 years. Now we can organize our own poetry festival with all the poets we like, and we can now organize it without any governmental money." So the travel business of the one could get all the poets to China. The hotel chain could provide them for the rooms, and the taxi cab will bring them everywhere. So they could organize a festival because they had their own money to put into it, which was a tremendous good story, of course. But on the other hand, if a festival can only survive when it gets money from an individual or of the government to organize a festival with a lot of poets, and if he said no, or if she says no, then the festival would be gone. I don't know what I would do. I'm very happy that I could be independent, but in a world where independency is possible, maybe I should also say yes to the multimillionaire or the government.
Just now, one Tripti, the one Indian, she is a journalist also. She has written that the thing that we have diverted from the theme, but I don't think we have diverted from the theme, because poetry festival is as important as poetry in contemporary world. Because every word, everywhere, basically India also, when we have started poetry festival, there was only one poetry festival. Now in every state poetry festival. So poetry festival is the place, taking the place where the poets can come and talk or read their poetry. So this is, we are not diverting from the subject theme. So yes, a story in between, so that it become more interesting, more light. We cannot always talk about the argument for the big issues only. So some life oriented stories should also come. And Bas has shared many. There's an experience which were as a poetry festival director he has been experiencing. So Ashraf, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, No, I wanted to say that finally, as I was telling, it is like a map of underground. When you start somewhere, there is some line connected to some other station. So we are all connected. Politics, poetry, humanity, festivals, publishing, activists. You cannot divide or make a division between one section to another. And when we are talking like from the spot, from the location. We are not reading only books. No, we are living these words alive. So we are expressing our experiences together and public.
Yeah, and also because going back to the topic, because the topic is also a sort of mind frame. Because, like the Polish poet Szymborska says, when I go outside and put my feet on the street, I take political steps. Of course, because it's Poland, it's Krakow. What happened there? What is that? Because everything I do is connected. She's a poet. She's a good poet, but everything she does is connected with politics. So you can even could say my poetry is not about politics because everything is politics. So why could you say it's about politics? Because every topic, every issue is politic. Or you say it's only political. And that's the same what I said in the beginning about all poetry is politics. It is, of course, the fact that you can write poetry, that it be read, that you write about, even when you write about nature. What kind of nature is that? Is it endangered nature because they cut the trees? Is it danger because in Poland sometimes it was Russia and sometimes it was not Russia? Everything is political. Even when you talk about a fence or the road or the houses, it also has political parts of it.
Yeah.
So saying,
and you know, Rati, yeah, we took our portion of freedom. You know, we as poets need some little freedom from the topic, and we got it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
I want to add one thing when you are talking about the nature. I met a poet in Netherlands.
Yeah.
No, not Netherlands. No, Norway.
Norway.
Helge. He is a psychiatric, and Ordway has taken me to his place, and they said that when we reached to his village, actually the Norway, all the cities are like villages for us, for Indians, because cities are different thing. There means all the villages. So when he has taken, you know that where he has taken us, he has taken near to sea beach, which was not like a beach, it was a barren beach, and there were few trees, and he says that this is my drawing room, and this tree is my friend. When my guests come, I bring them here on this beach and this area, and I talk to my friend, that is tree. He has written a wonderful, because I have translated his book because of his personality. I was so much impressed by his personality, and he says that his pure, beautiful, this nature beauty is there.
Yeah.
And but he was politically fighting for that area. He fought the government to make that place barren, because nobody can enter in that place or pick a grass from that place.
Yeah.
And then they told us that what happened, because Norway is becoming suddenly very rich. Before it was quite poor, and when it became very rich, people started buying the big land on the mountains.
Yeah, they
And
found
then
they found oil.
Oil, because of oil money.
Yeah.
And they're destroying mountain, and rich people from other countries are coming to Norway to enjoy that and destroying that area, that beautiful scenery.
Yeah,
So that writing beautiful nature poetry was also political poetry for Helge.
Yeah.
So everything is a politics.
Yeah.
So okay, now please, Ashraf, you were saying something. Sorry to interfere you. Ashraf.
Yes, no, the image was interrupted. That's why I was thinking internet has something. But as I told you, we came to talk about many icons who were somehow involved in politics, involved in revolution and activism. And we came to know that it is not the poetic situation, but it is the poetic language of the poem that defines the poetry, which is good or not.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank Bas, because he shared his experiences and a lot of his stories he told us about some people and some situations were also very fruitful for this talk. I'd like to thank you, Bas.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rati. Thank you, Ashraf.
Please come whenever we call you.
Yeah, yes. Okay.
Ashraf and Bas, thank you. Ashraf, thanks a lot, because you are now you running the Kritya.
Women are leads.
So we are together running, all of us together running the Kritya. This is the power of Kritya. Actually, Bas knows that in Kritya festival, I don't organize, I don't invite presentators who present the poets and all. No. The guest among the guest poets become the host poet when they come to Kritya, and they take the charge of different things. Okay. So that is how we work here. Very so good. Thanks a lot to Bas, and thanks to a lot Ashraf. You are really very you work very hard, and you are actually giving quite a big support. Thanks to audience, all of you. And I'm really happy today to talk about this, because this was the subject on which I wanted to talk on. So thanks a lot to all of you friends.
Okay.
Okay.